people will be able to actually live forever. I do believe that.
Is that a huge opportunity if you're, kind of doing a request for startups almost?
What does that even mean? Where does it exist? Where do I go? It's not clear to me. I mean, that's crazy.
You are right. It is like a breakup because founders take that failure very personally.
I'd probably try to build an artificial womb.
Oh.
Yeah. There will be no need for United Healthcare. It won't exist. It won't be a concept.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 9 of 3 Course Founders. Today, you're going to tune into a conversation I had with Kian. He's the founder and CEO of Nucleus. Their first product is an all-in-one DNA health test that sequences way more of your DNA than products like 23andMe. Here on this episode, Kian has a lot more dreams about using your data, scientific data, and AI to help us better understand our bodies and our health. And we get real sci-fi about what the future might look like when we're tracking all the right information and feeding it into a personalized model, which might be the unlock we need to live forever. We'll see. Beyond that, we get into his founding journey, the dramatic moment we're in AI upending industries like healthcare, including how that might mean the death of insurance, his theories on hiring and firing, including the future of AI employees, and the intensity of the first year of building a science and discovery intensive startup like Nucleus. A shout out to Mr. O, Korean restaurant in Manhattan and Flatiron on 24th Street. They were fantastic hosts. The food was delicious. If you live in New York, check it out. If you're visiting, check it out. And if you're tuning in on a podcast, that's what you're going to hear along the way. All right, with that, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. This is 3 Course Founders, episode 9 with Kian, founder, CEO, Nucleus.
Kian, welcome to 3 Course Founders. We're in it.
We're live right now?
We're live.
Oh my God.
You ready? You feeling ready?
Look at you, right?
You just look at me, you just talk.
I just got to eat
But I'm going to
food.
leave this in. This is a good starter conversation. You're the founder and CEO of Nucleus.
Yes.
We're going to talk a lot about not Nucleus today. We're going to talk about being a founder, about the market of Nucleus, about health tech. We're probably going to talk about random tech startup.
And we're going to eat, right?
We're going to eat.
Okay, good.
This is not just prop food, although that would be hilarious.
That would be funny. This is first course, right?
This is first course.
Great.
So as we dig in, let's start to dig into first course. It looks delicious. We're at Mr. O in Flatiron, by the way, on 24th Street. And this not only looks good, smells good, the staff is awesome. Let's begin. I'm going to start by asking questions so you start to dig in. We always like to start with the market insight because I think what people could most learn from founders is often adjacent to the thing that they're building. Mm-hmm. And so the way we put it is it's not the thing that is selling your particular version of your product and your service, but instead it's the thing that is what you're learning along the way.
Yeah.
The insight that maybe in a few years, a health tech founder will thank you for kind of hinting today at them. So let's start with maybe the mega statement here as we dig in, and don't be afraid to talk while you're chewing on this show. It's allowed. What is the market insight you think more people in startup land and venture capital and health tech land should know?
I think the main thing for us is that medicine today it's just really bad data science. I think what's going to happen over time is that you sort of begin to have this quantification of healthcare, right, with the rise of different kind of diagnostics and lab tests. And for a while, that was like non-interpretable. But now with the moment of AI, it's possible to combine the two together, right? So you think about the most kind of frontier medical diagnostic tests, like a whole genome or genetic test, combined with the power of a kind of an infrastructure layer LLM, converging on the fact that medicine is going to become so much more quantified, and everyone's going to have almost a real-time doctor in their pocket. That is the key realization now, and you're starting to already see the ingredients of this new, really, health system.
Inherent in that is the idea that it couldn't have been done before and maybe, was not being done before.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I want to know if we were looking at how we've been doing research in medicine, if we've been doing what we've been doing in clinical settings, we've been doing in even data science within health tech companies. Were people onto something before, large language models and this potential to, gather this amount of data? Do you think it was all flawed? Do you think it comes from a flawed theory of what we could have achieved in a pre-large language model, generative transformer-based world?
Well, yeah, I think like with any great company, there's multiple actually independent trends that converge. And it's not just technological innovation, it's also consumer taste. So if you think about, first let's start on the kind of technology front, which is, there seems to be, I always like to use the example of genetic sequencing, right? Which is sort of, the way someone should think about Nucleus today is like, if you looked at a company like Ramp, right? The naive view of Ramp is that you're like, Ramp, it's a corporate startup credit card. But then really, if you look closely, it's actually, they're building a financial suite, right?
Right.
Similarly, if you looked at Nucleus, who's very famous, by the way, you'd say, oh, it's a genetic testing company. But really, it's actually a broader consumer health stack, right? So I think that's a very good, kind of analogy people have in their minds. I always like to say also, like, DNA for us is like books for Amazon. It's sort of the beginning. And if you think about like genetics starting there, DNA is omni-relevant. It's relevant for every disease you're at risk for. It's relevant for what drugs you metabolize. It's relevant for family planning, right? How do you have healthy children? It's also relevant for, ancestry, eye color, the long tail of other kind of traits that people may want. And so thinking this all together, you view it as almost like, okay, there's this massive decrease in cost of this genetic test, right? Historically, you could maybe get, 70,000 different genetic tests that all read, different markers in your DNA. We can now combine all 70,000 into just one. So in other words, we can actually read someone's molecular profile so much more effectively for so much cheaper. And then you can see how that converges with AI. We're already today, we're building a natural language courier over your genome where you can actually talk to your DNA. So you can see two trends independently converge, and that's just on the technology front. On the consumer front, consumer taste has changed. I mean, a lot has happened since the launch of the first genetic testing company in 2006, talking about an entire, base of people who are trying to now quantify their health, right, led by people, like Brian Johnson, like, Peter Tia, and, beyond. So all these things have now converged into enabling Nucleus, and it's not as if it was just like, oh, this wasn't possible before. They were all being developed over decades. I mean, not just artificial intelligence, but also independently sequencing. So now it's converging.
Inherent in that, there are a couple of different things that are interesting to me. I'll think first of kind of RCTs and where broad demographic analysis brought us, which is our average lifespan has increased dramatically, over the past however many hundred years. We've found theories of the world that have to do with diagnoses and prescriptions that work on average. And what's really fascinating to me is like this idea of what wasn't possible before was anything else. Because anything that was individualized, anything that tried to look too hard at the mechanistic effects, you could not be sure it would work.
Because there's not enough data.
There's not enough data, exactly. And the confidence interval of a doctor, a physician who wants to do no harm, to say to somebody without having a very deep relationship with that person first, which they generally don't, or a long ability to spend a lot of time with that person or a lot of money with that person, you couldn't confidently have that be part of our healthcare system. And that's what it almost seems to me that you're suggesting is it's a technological unlock that enables for the first time this ability to get very specific as to what's going on in a particular body, obviously using the data of many particular bodies. Nucleus, you're building on top of it. What else, though, let's get broad. What else is unlocked by either, kind of understanding the whole genome, that maybe be too nucleus oriented, but also this notion of feeding this through AI as it exists today. And I asked that specifically in the notion of doctors will want whatever's at the other end of this.
Yes.
Maybe not as professionals, literally we'll see how every profession changes due to AI, but there's some differential in how they will be able to diagnose and treat, or how we will diagnose and prevent.
Prevent, diagnose, treat, yes.
Talk about what that world looks like, not from a experience perspective, a consumer perspective, but from what we're capable of doing differently in medicine.
Let me give you an example. Okay, I did a blood test recently, and I had super high LDL levels. Okay, I come from a family of doctors. My dad's a physician; he's an ophthalmologist specifically, and he
breaking the fourth wall for a second. Two Persians, full of doctors in the family.
I'm not eating Persian food. This is crazy. What's going on here? Who's coordinating this? I'm just kidding.
That's actually pretty. That's what this should have been. This is delicious anyway.
This is amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
Continue.
And so I had high cholesterol, and so I'm at dinner literally with my family. This is literally a couple of nights ago, and my dad says, "Oh, you have really high cholesterol. It's because you don't eat good food. You're just, you don't get enough sleep." He's like, you're male, that increases your risk also. He just listed off different variables and kind of independently analyzed them. And I said, Dad, this is actually, I swear it's a true story. I go on my Nucleus portal, right, and I look specifically at coronary artery disease risk because my family, we have a kind of history of my uncle, unfortunately, suddenly had a heart attack very young, like young 40s, and he died, right? So there is always that fear that maybe I'm at risk, etc. And what we found is that in our model, in the Nucleus model, when we actually calculate someone's risk for like coronary artery disease specifically, we factored in cholesterol, blood pressure, sex, someone's entire whole genome, BMI, diabetes status. In other words, all these variables that my dad was kind of grasping at and trying to say, oh, it was this is what's causing it. I said, actually, we've already quantified it. We've already factored it in, and we've actually already calculated my risk of getting this specific thing, right? And it was actually, much lower than one would guess. So even with the added cholesterol, in other words, it really made me think, wow, this is so powerful. Look, in my pocket, literally in my pocket, I can pull up and already start measuring and quantifying instead of some vague, fuzzy notion of, oh, it's genetics. I mean, I love when someone says to me, oh, my LDL is genetics, because I can just open up my Nucleus app and check, right? It's kind of like this little interesting exercise where, and my dad also said, go to a cardiologist. And so I'm going to go to a cardiologist. I'm going to see what they have to say, of course. But the thing that I think is fundamental is the cardiologist is going to say, by the way, a lot of factors influence cholesterol. They're going to say it's genetics. They're going to say it's how much you exercise. It's going to say it's your blood pressure. And it's going to go from this really kind of fuzzy qualitative, we actually don't know what it is. It's always like this, like, well, there's many factors, by the way. It's always this like almost tautological like escape route to say, no, I know all the factors. We've measured all the factors. And now I can specifically use all those factors to calculate my risk. And, it was actually interesting because if you looked within my family, there was within certain members of my family dramatically higher risk of heart disease. I was fortunate not to have those genetics. So again, we're starting to already see this kind of reincarnation or this sort of inception of a new mode of medicine.
It's almost deterministic action as opposed to probabilistic.
Yeah, I would say it's
in that steering in that direction.
It's a far more quantified and specific standard of preventative care specifically. So it's inherently probabilistic, but it's much more, I think, actually taking sort of the fuzzy, qualitative, again, kind of bad data scientist model and turn it into something that is super clear, super concise, and unmistakable almost in what it's saying. So that's the sort of way I think about the transition.
What happens to the model of healthcare in this world? Let's not just talk about physicians. Let's talk about health tech companies. Let's talk about...
I mean, honestly, I think one of the things that we're doing at Nucleus is, we're building the world's first AI doctor.
Yeah.
And I think there is a world where you could argue the end game of any consumer health business is to completely supplant doctors. You could argue that's the end game. And
like a Forward or One Medical already was trying to do more with automation and technology and supplant doctors to some extent.
There's already a beginning of, is the primary care health, maybe the primary care should be replaced by just like kind of an AI that knows all your health data. Because that's really what, again, go back to my dad as an example. Amazing. I mean, he saves people's vision. I mean, it's an amazing work that he does. The vast majority of cases in the clinic, this is true for all doctors. A patient comes in. If you really think about what they're doing, it's sort of an input-output algorithm that they're running, right? I ask you a question. You give me information. I have this sort of, Bayesian kind of probability uniform distribution. And then it starts slowly, adjusting as I get each kind of interval piece of information. And then I think,
model.
it's probably this thing, right? Based off the information you give me. It's just like a pure information exchange. And in the physician's mind, he'll ask, a series of questions, he'll run a series of tests, and then use that information to make some sort of assessment. Right. In other words, there is no really kind of black box thing here. It's not the 30 years in medical school, right? That's not what it is. It's a very clear, specific algorithm that can be taken out of the hands of a physician and into the hands of an AI. And moreover, I think that, I'm not saying that doctors won't be useful. Of course, there'll be people who use AI as the ultimate lever, but I think the nature of a physician is going to change, where it's probably going to end up being more specialized, more kind of very specific procedures or
almost more in the treatment path than the diagnosis path.
Yeah, I think so. I think I do think
because
that
maybe there's more
gonna
variables
be
introduced in
exceptions.
the treatment path.
Yeah, like,
you're almost reintroducing uncertainty, which AI will also help with. But in the treatment path, having that physician be the curator probably becomes important again.
yes, I do think that there's going to, at some point when the AI flags some sort of molecular abnormality, it will go to a doctor to kind of peruse over. Let me give you another example today to kind of take that into the brass tacks. I have an 8 Sleep, Mateo's one of our investors, and I, woke up from my 8 Sleep one day and it said, my heart rate was up 50%. And I thought, heart rate up 50%, that's crazy. Must be a bug, it's some anomalous thing. And then around, 10 years later, I was sick, feverishly sick. And I thought to myself, in a weird way, kind of that molecular signal predicted my, cold, whatever. And also then I was thinking to myself, imagine if, my 8 Sleep said, hey, your heart rate's super high, right? And immediately connected to, a physician who then reviewed that data and say, let's monitor you, or let's really make sure that, what this can be, and then already maybe potentially try to prevent my cold, or at the very least be there at the onset of my cold to then treat me accordingly. In other words, I can imagine some world where there's some AI human conflicts initially, but then over time you can imagine that entire stack will just be some artificial intelligence. So,
I mean, it seems like the biggest opportunity that you, and this, as we've met and gotten to know each other, I actually have thought about this a few different times. The ability to add the tracking of data and the ingestion of data and the normalization of data is perhaps the most, if we specifically orient this around non-nucleus opportunities, although I'm sure you'll try to grab as much of it as you can, as every entrepreneur should. But like that seems to be the most promising thing, which is, the 8 Sleep in that moment is providing a piece of data that has some sort of net utility or net new insight to provide.
Yeah.
A wearable of any kind has a net new insight to provide. But there's stuff that we don't yet track probably too that's really interesting. So for example, there are people who will, regularly test their testosterone or regularly test for heart disease or cancer or whatever it might be. And that might be something we do more regularly. Or there might be things that I don't even think about that we might do more regularly, as far as, okay, we don't think about this today. Maybe it's our daily temperature for XYZ reason, and Nucleus either makes use of it or says, whatever, I don't care about this piece of data because it's not abnormal. Is that a huge opportunity if you're, kind of doing a request for startups almost? Is one of the big gaps that because we didn't have utility for this, I mean, even as we became a more quantified self, one of the challenges I think with that quantified self industry was like, great, now we have tracking everything, but we can't take action on most of it. And sometimes the action also is either harmful or negative. Is that what's changing?
Yeah, I think one example I like to use to kind of articulate sort of what you're describing is, if you think about the rise of Instagram, it may not sound very similar to the rise of a consumer health application, but they're actually very similar.
Right.
The reason is that, think about the iPhone. The iPhone was responsible for the mass digitization of photos. Mm-hmm. So we went from, basically literally the dark room, right, developing these photos to a super scalable, super fast way of just immediately getting data, i.e. photos, onto my phone.
Yep.
And so what happened is, as the proliferation of this hardware device, your iPhone increased, there was also the corresponding exponential proliferation in photo data. But it wasn't the Photos app that actually was responsible for making kind of sense of and sharing this data. It was a completely different company, namely Instagram, that enabled everyone to take this data derived from a hardware device and to share it, to edit it, to play with it, to like it, etc. And I think you can think of a very similar analogy today in health data, where you have so many different hardware companies that are actually developing kind of every single aspect of what I think is the human health data stack, right? We're talking everywhere from your heart rate through Whoop, Aura, Levels, 8 Sleep, Apple Watch, right? All the way to, microbiome testing, to blood testing, right? These are just different parts of the human health data stack. And if you think about it, all these different hardware companies, what they're really fundamentally doing is they're exponentiating the existence of health data that I believe, in the same way it did for Instagram, a separate company will make sense of. A separate company will analyze, integrate, and ultimately provide insight to the customer they cannot get anywhere else. So that is the way I think about it. And if you notice, the difference between the Instagram analogy and this analogy is that there's actually thousands of data sets. that need to be integrated. It's not just one. Every single one of these different hardware devices, capture a different part of the human experience. So there's a much larger company to be built here that I think anyone can even imagine. I think it's going to be much larger than, Apple or Google, just because the entirety of someone's health, I mean, it's billions and billions and billions of, molecular interactions at one time. If you can actually measure every single one of those, I mean, it's going to be exceptional. I mean, people will be able to actually live forever. I do believe that. Because once you start measuring, I don't know necessarily in our lifetime it's going to be close, I think. But I mean, one thing that I think I can underestimate with that is like, I have to recalibrate my model because now that AI exists, I think all of scientific progress is going to be exponentiated. So I do think there's this idea that's like whatever I had a model of, is now totally different. Right? AI will make discoveries before scientists do.
How much will we accelerate? Will AI accelerate? How much will AI understand as good diagnosis and treatment before or during AI being good at ingesting the data and spitting out results? In other words, there's the slope of we're getting good tracking data, AI is helping to normalize it, AI is beginning to understand it, it's beginning to understand how to distribute recommendations and analysis. And there's a different slope that's almost derivative of like it's getting good and better than what exists, obviously, as the right answer. And those two slopes might diverge in their velocity or their acceleration, as in, does it begin to get really good at giving us bad advice, maybe even in ways that takes us a while to understand before it's good at giving the good advice? There's a better way to capture that. But
I think you're articulating there's two parts of this. One part is tracking the health. Actually bringing the data together. Another part is actually kind of making sense of the data to give some sort of recommendation, right? And you're identifying two things, which is correct. I think that what people often get wrong with this is that there was sort of very low-level hanging fruit that was never properly integrated with, and therefore caused it such that very obvious recommendations were never given. Let me say this a different way, which is that Silicon Valley has been so fascinating with personal hardware devices, right? They basically completely ignored the entirety of the other realm of health data, which is diagnostic testing and molecular testing. That's starting to change, starting to see that change already, but you can think about health data as a dichotomy. There's the personal hardware derivable data, the auras, the levels, the 8 sleeps of the world. Then there's the Quest and LabCorp of the world and other kind of medical diagnostic lab test infrastructure companies, right? That do it, right? Illumina, Quest, LabCorp, whatever. And Thermo is another example. And if you think about a company like Nucleus, what we do is we sit in between these two worlds. And the problem is that if you had only existed in the personal hardware device world, which many companies and sort of, founders have, you would think, oh, there's not much I can do with my, heart rate. It just seems sort of falls flat. But everybody knows there's dramatic things you can do with the blood test, with the genetic test, with some sort of other diagnostic test. I mean, these are very well, or with a full body MRI scan even, right? There's like very clear, in many cases actually, very clear evidence-based guidelines. One just example I can give off the cuff is, Angelina Jolie breast cancer. That was, over a decade ago. Everyone knows if you give someone a piece of information of their breast cancer risk, there's very clear downstream steps they can take to mitigate and prevent the condition altogether, right? That was very well known. So data leads to action. That was true in the medical world. It wasn't always true, but it was pretty. There were very compelling examples. Yeah, and they're very compelling examples where that's the obvious case where data is used to have some sort of action. In Silicon Valley, it didn't really exist. So then these two things kind of started to become devoid. Now there's a new kind of crop of companies coming together where they actually sit in between these two worlds. And this is what's so interesting because if you look at certain companies, what they're really doing is they're rebranding effectively very, very old diagnostic tests. I mean, blood tests have been around for forever. Right? Blood tests aren't new; they're basically commodities. But if you actually put a nice portal on it, you say, hey, this is actually sexy and new. All of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, this thing is sexy and new, right? So what I think is interesting is that on the kind of actionability side, let me give you an example of today, something that, I think everyone's going to have access to in a couple months, which is, hey, Kian, as a 24-year-old male living in Brooklyn, wow, you had super high LDL levels in your last blood test. I told you that. Oh, That's actually no surprise because you're in the 95th percentile for your genetic risk for familial hypercholesterolemia or high cholesterol. Interesting. Already I put two pieces together that for some reason are very obvious that are not put together. We found people with similar sex, age, and genetics as you saw a 10% reduction in their LDL levels when they did this specific workout tracked on their Apple Watch. Why is my blood test and my genetics not connected to my DoorDash orders? That's obvious. That should exist. Why is what I'm eating today not integrated with what my current different metabolites are and what my DNA disposed me to? Right? A lot of people come to us and they say, "Oh, I have really high LDL, but it doesn't make sense. I'm a triathlete. I do this. I eat this. I do this. What's going on?" And it's genetics. And then that helps them understand the world and thinks them how to think about it. Similarly, someone might have the opposite problem where they might be, super low LDL or average LDL, but maybe they have super good genetics or whatever. So.
I mean, where this is so visceral even today for a lot of people who have health problems, autoimmune patients who have triggers, literally have to go discover if they want to treat it other than medicine. There are other pathways to actually discover and test against their triggers and the intensity of those triggers and the timing.
And that's a specific subpopulation.
Right.
The example I gave is for everyone.
Right.
That's what's so amazing about it.
Right.
Every person should know. Yeah. I do my blood test. Genetics impacts each and every single one of those
A dumb
metabolites.
question I want to ask, but I know the answer to already is does this lead us to have more sterile lives? But obviously the opportunity in this is health, psychological well-being, and mental well-being. Some of this stuff at first is going to feel obvious and negative. Don't eat chocolate or less sugar is going to be a thing. But less sugar.
It's more specific than that now.
Exactly.
Because it's hey, here's how your body actually digests sugar based off your DNA.
Right.
And then it's, oh, wow, you actually have, below average or above average, sugar levels, whatever. And then I integrate that with my food as well. So I start taking all these pieces in together in a way that
Or
just
maybe I get to
doesn't
have
exist.
ice cream at the end of the day if I'm measuring and I have more control over my overall health.
Exactly. You know what causes what. And that's the thing.
And you
Goes
can
back
make
to the-
choices.
Goes back to the fundamental thing, which is at the dinner table with my family. What is driving my high LDL?
Right.
The fact that today.
And do you want to do anything about it?
Yeah, and of course I want to know, because once I identify the factor,
exactly.
I mean, it's like with anything. You have to first identify the factor before you can change the factor.
So
if I don't know, I'm flying blind.
Is the Black Mirror on this that this will then be used against us? And I know you don't want to build that version of the future, but let's play the
Black Mirror on this.
Let's play it though, right? Okay. Insurance companies, underwriting.
It's illegal for any insurance. A lot of people don't know this, so I'll say this. It is illegal for any insurance companies, health insurance companies specifically, to use genetics data to price their premiums.
Just the genetics data though.
Genetic.
But I guess you're talking about a more holistic approach.
Yes, that's true. But I just want to be clear on the genetics part, which is a lot of people get this wrong, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, 2008 passed. You cannot use genetic data in health insurance. Great to know, right? Awesome. Thank you, government. Now, for the kind of full stack, already insurance companies do what they can. I mean, that's not a new paradigm. That's not a new shift. Right? They do what they can to try to, block off access, unfortunately. Do I think in the future there could be regulations that say, hey, insurance companies, you can't specifically, in the way that the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, did sort of, which is hey, maybe you can't use a certain set of information to price insurance. Of course, the counterargument to that is, if you actually can use the full stack information, you get everyone better and better premiums. It's
exactly.
The
price
average is
of
actually
cost
better.
is nothing.
Right? It's actually just ends up coming
healthcare
better.
is next to free.
So also, I would argue
healthcare is only catastrophic healthcare.
I would also argue that, and this is even maybe potentially more out there, but I don't think insurance companies will exist in a couple of decades.
Well,
I mean, United Healthcare as a company, it's the most valuable healthcare company in the world. It shouldn't exist.
Well, and just to I think I understand what you're playing out to play out for people who might not be moving as fast as you are in that implication. It's that health outcomes are so controllable or malleable or understood. The cost of healthcare on a passive basis becomes next to nothing. It's all catastrophic healthcare. I get hit by a car. Okay, fine, I need to go to a hospital. In that world, United Healthcare doesn't need to exist.
And also the fact that I believe everything will be out of pocket.
Right, exactly. In that case, everything's so cheap.
Because it's so
out of pocket
cheap.
or government funded. Maybe we all do want universal healthcare at that point because it's so cheap.
But everything becomes so cheap. Even the diagnostic testing, it's so cheap. Everything's gonna be so cheap. It's going to be so kind of AI and software native. Right? We love software margins. So, Silicon Valley's always loved software margins. And then the actual most expensive thing, which is really paying a doctor, and a lot of physical infrastructure too, but really paying a doctor, gonna be completely eliminated. I mean, there will be no arguably doctor. Everything's going to be AI.
It'll be a person whose profession
marginal cost of care is effectively nothing. And you're right. There's going to be very acute, very specific care that will be required. But even that, I think you can imagine a world where, and this might sound even crazier, but if you bear with me, humanoids occupy, some extremely, extremely cheap labor, occupy this physical infrastructure, and they can be more precise in every single possible surgery you can imagine. And again, all these prices, if the free market have their way, will basically converge on nothing. There will be no need for United Healthcare. It won't exist. It won't be a concept.
So here's an interesting notion. Health tech in general, or people building even marketplaces for doctors and psychiatrists, or they're building EMR startups or things like this. There's a short-term, conclusion that you can say of like, okay, that's financialization is there for that. So those founders might be able to exit the market before what I'm about to ask is true. But would you advise against startup founders, friends of yours, from starting anything that serves the current population of healthcare and the providers and the...
I really love this question.
Yeah.
It's a great question. It's one that remarkably, I haven't been asked before, and I have very strong opinions on this, which is you can take two kind of approaches to this. You could say, healthcare needs to be evolved, or that we need a revolution. Okay? I believe deeply we don't need an evolution, we need a revolution. The healthcare system as you know it from the most upstream assumption is horrible. It needs to be thrown away completely. And I think the vast majority of real patients would believe this as well. So given that, do I think founders should be building for an established healthcare system? I actually think it's sort of the weak-based case. You don't have actually a very strong vision for the future. And you already see this today, frankly. There are certain companies where you can tell they're trying really, really hard to kind of shove the AI into the current healthcare system. And it is never going to work. Maybe, you get, and when I say it's never going to work, I'm not even necessarily saying that
20-year time
I'm not necessarily saying that you won't get a good exit in the short term. Maybe you will. Maybe you will make something really more efficient and you'll make your investors happy, whatever. But I'm saying fundamentally, it lacks imagination and conviction. Because as I said, the end game...
You're making more of a judgment than you are a statement of deterministic fact about their financial outcome.
Yeah, the end game is you're trying to replace these people. I mean, so it's like amazing. It's like, oh, we like I see these things sometimes. It's like, oh, we used AI and now there's a doctor that's reviewing everything. I'm like, what? like maybe they're like, okay, I'm scared about regulations. Like I don't know, but there's some sort of really inherent like opposing thing here where it's almost like there's this inherent conservatism with the AI. Like Nucleus will be in the coming launch an AI doctor. You can use a natural language query of your entire genome. You'll be able to upload your blood, your epigenetics, whatever, everything, ideally, eventually. Already, when I talk to this thing, I'm like, oh my God, this is an emergent thing that should, like, of course this is going to exist. Of course, 2020, it's obvious. And if I'm going to be honest with myself, if I'm going to be honest, running Nucleus, it's someone should have this access directly.
Right.
There shouldn't be barricades set up that people shouldn't have access to their own health data. I mean, if you look at EHR today, you're talking about a system where you don't even have access to your data. I'm the founder of Nucleus. I don't even know where my EHR, where it is. I don't know what it is. I'm like, what does that even mean? What does it exist? Where do I go? It's not clear to me. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, if anyone in the world should know, I should know. I don't even know.
You make good use of that data.
I actually want to just build, I'm almost building Nucleus just for myself. So I can be like, man, I want to put my data somewhere. I don't want to deal with the healthcare system. I want to put all my data onto a single piece of software. And that, another great example, at this dinner, we're going back to this dinner with my family. I was like, I need a blood test, right? My dad's like, go to, this doctor. No, I want to go mynucleus.com. I want to order my blood test. Or better yet, it should be automatic. It should be every 3 months de facto. There's like the machination in the background. Maybe it gets sent to me. Maybe I know exactly where to go. Maybe it's close to my home. There's, an algorithm that already figures out, hey, Kian, good morning. It's 8 a.m. You have to go to get your blood test. Oh yeah, I'll go. Hey, here's a clinic 2 minutes from you. I go, it's everything ready to go. And it's built out in that way. So you can imagine that world. And that world is coming much faster than people think.
I love it. And I think the thing that, if I encapsulate the thing that you're doing, it's encouraging those founders to think much harder as to whether they're in it for the imagination and the creation of the future or the financialization. If they're for the financialization, fine, build something that is the 5-year outcome. If you are trying to get inspired about the future, think harder about how the way you're building it today might only not be effective, efficient, et cetera, but might contribute to a slowdown. And I think about this in terms of self-driving cars. I think we're really going to have a struggle because of the way that not only the automobile industry, but also people will resist a revolution.
Yes, and let me give you a good example here.
Yeah.
If you go into an autonomous vehicle today, you know what happens? there's still a steering wheel.
Right.
What the hell?
Right.
Why is there a steering wheel? No, but now extrapolate that. Extrapolate that across every industry and every innovation ever. The equivalent of that is every health tech company that's building for the medical establishment. There's a steering wheel. Why is there a steering wheel there? Get rid of it.
Well, this is where I talk
Get
about.
rid of it, and it's just a matter of. And look, if you look at Elon's new designs, there's no steering wheel.
Right.
And that you have to give Elon credit for these sort of things where there is a fearlessness and a just an obsession with taking the thing to the next level. And it's honestly often not a technological limitation. It's an existing infrastructure, regulatorily complex restriction, and I think that's every founder needs to think about.
And some of it now, though, I think with AI, it's going to not only be that, it's going to be a new thing, which is a cultural resistance. I think, for example, the self-driving thing, tomorrow, if we ripped out all cars and trucks and said, actually, all of them should be autonomous, they'd be moving faster, they'd be safer, and I think there's like only a few conditions where they wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But we will not do the revolution in that space at all. That'll take forever now because we know culturally there's going to be resistance.
And it gets to a fundamental point when you build startups, which is so often the common narrative is what is the technical thing that changed, which is always validated and always correct, and the best companies usually have that. But anyone who's trying to bring innovation to everyone should know very deeply and very intimately, very experientially, it goes well beyond technology. And that really often the reason why something doesn't exist is not because of technology, it's because of some sort of political, regulatory, slash kind of cultural inertia that limits, restricts, and even in some cases actively shuts down.
We as an industry need to get better, though, and I think this is a responsibility of a lot of founders and venture capitalists at explaining ourselves. It's really difficult, and I think it's one of those activities where we often feel fought against, but I think people would feel far more convinced if we help them in that. Yeah, and right now the industry would probably revolt against me and say, oh, it's the media is not like doing its job of helping people do positive sci-fi. And I go, okay, maybe. I don't know if I buy that or not. I still think it's up to founders, venture capitalists to begin to tell really great stories.
No, I agree. I mean, part of like the self-driving industry's job is not to antagonize truck drivers, not to antagonize, the public, whatever. Similarly, the job of, consumer health founders to say, hey, look, ultimately this is gonna be better for the patient, which is what we all want.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, you quoted the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm.
Yep.
No one wants to do harm.
Exactly.
That's fundamentally obvious. I mean, we can all agree on that, right? My dad and I, we come in from different angles. My dad wants to incorporate genetic testing into his practice. That's beautiful, right? That's what we want. So more of that at the kind of inductive level, at the broadest scale would be amazing.
Love it. Last question for this market insights portion of this first course. Have you yet identified other industries that look a lot like this? I'm going to actually use autonomous driving as it doesn't really look like this. It's still AI will automate everything and make it more efficient. But it's not because of like... it is because of a massive data unlock and AI will be able to see things in computer vision, but it's more simplistic, I think, than the healthcare version. Is there something other than healthcare where you've either seen someone begin to approach or you've even spotted a similar input-output dynamic where Nucleus could be built for X?
I think, this one, I think there's a lot of different horses in this race, but AI employees. I mean, already we were joking internally. We were actually going to buy a computer. And Anthropic has this new model that, you've probably seen it. It moves the mouse and it's like, move to like this location on the computer, and it moves and it clicks. And we're actually going to have all day a computer running.
Yep.
We're going to open it up, have it, and like give it instructions like, hey, go edit this code and whatever, this repo. And I was thinking to myself, this is
where it's going.
Like the end game here is like, what is the end game here, But I do think that it's true that as it gets cheaper, faster, better, you may need more engineers to actually manage the thing. Because at some point, like, you will need some humans to or maybe I'm not being imaginative. Maybe that's not true though. Maybe actually it is true that you just have this like literally. Wow, the music's gone more dramatic.
As we are talking about AI employees.
It's like, this is the end. Dun-dun. This is the end.
I do think it's interesting when it comes to the notion of AI employees and the relation to healthcare.
But it's input output too. To your point, it's data in, data out. I mean, that's all that an organization is. It's a bunch of nodes. Information in, information out. You can abstract away everything else. In, out,
like healthcare, it's a lot of fuzziness. This is the funny thing.
That's true.
So
that's actually
fuzzy.
true. And that's like, I was talking to our marketing team recently about the problem of attribution.
Yes.
And it's like
on ROI, even once you have attribution.
The how is this not a solved problem?
Yeah.
And then you're like, how is this not a solved problem?
Yeah.
Like attribution should be like, I should know exactly
Yeah.
where the customer came from, how long, everything, exactly. Oh, it's like, oh, they click out and it's like, you get confused. It's like actually attributed. I'm like, what? I'm like, I did it on myself. I was like, I'm going to go start an attribution company. Like, it's crazy. What's going on?
But even the
here?
notion of like, did I do a good job today is unquantifiable in a way that I think is interesting.
And I think, honestly, organizations are, I've really thought a lot about this. I think organizations are fundamentally misunderstood. And I think it's because two things. I think one, most people never have to build an organization from scratch, which is a startup. So you never actually understand what an organization is, right? Because you're just a little node in it. So you never kind of have that perspective. That's one problem. The other problem is if you do start an organization from scratch, it's very hard to pull yourself away from like so much dogma that exists, right? But I think about myself often where I'm like, wow, I really feel like this classical kind of model of startups is like completely wrong. Like, wow, this is like crazy. And there are certain things that I think over time, as you be a founder, then it takes not intelligence, but it takes courage. And then you apply courage to everything. We're saying that a lot of these things take courage. So.
I happen to know this is a hint for what we're going to be talking about in course 2. So Kian, why don't we eat a little bit more and then head on to course 2, shall we?
Perfect.
Awesome. Let's get into some spicy town square style topics. Mutual founder therapy. I asked founders to come to the table with something that to them feels vulnerable and useful as a lens, whether it's other existing founders, future founders, even past founders might find cathartic to hear founders talk about. And we're going to make it mutual. But Kian, tell me, what's something that feels to you something you need some founder therapy over?
People always talk about a power law of returns. There's actually many different power laws in startups. One of the many power laws is on decision making, right? Where all the decisions you make in a startup is follows actually a power law, where there's certain decisions that are super, super high leverage that, I don't think people fully appreciate that you can actually get a couple things right in your startup and be very, very successful. And you can make a million mistakes, but if there's sort of lower leverage mistakes or reversible mistakes, it actually doesn't matter. It never does matter.
Well, and to be clear, by the way, to people who don't understand the power law, inherent in a power law is the bunch of decisions that wind up not mattering and are small.
Yeah, a small number of decisions have basically
have a large effect.
Disproportionate impact on the ultimate outcome of the company, right? So like, there are many decisions that are basically ultimately negligible on a company, right? And so it kind of goes back to that like Jeff Bezos thing where it's like, okay, you can make decisions that are kind of, really consequential and reversible and decisions that are really consequential and irreversible. And it's
one-way doors versus two-way doors.
Exactly. Always make sure it's like you don't mistake one for the other because you're going to go slow, right? And it actually doesn't matter if you make mistakes in this business as long as you're moving fast because actually produces information. Anyways.
Oh man, I feel like I know what you're about to say.
So the power law equivalent here is people. That there's actually no decision that, and I think this is a helpful framework to think about it. So there's some of the most consequential decisions you could ever make for your company is the people that you bring to the two doors. And in thinking about this, what I think I came to realize is that, Vinod Khosla has this quote where he says, the company, the team you build is the company you build, right? And I think that is also something I did not understand until recently, where when I've been building Nucleus now for 4 years and like 7 months. So it's a pretty long time, to go at the same thing. I've seen a lot of different phases of the company, and the thing that I think I've most deeply and experientially learned is this fact that you have to be merciless, you have to be ruthless in who is on your team. And that doesn't mean you don't take care of people. That doesn't mean if something doesn't work out, you don't support them in the transition. Of course you do that. That's just like, it's the right thing to do. But it does mean that fundamentally you have to be relentless in firing. So, there's that old expression that's like, hire slow, fire fast kind of thing. I think it's actually hire fast and fire fast. Like when I hire people, for better and for worse, I almost like to push on what they think that I want to break their model of how fast a company can move. I want, someone to talk to them when it comes to me, they're in my office, a couple blocks from here, and I want to just pepper them, roast, grill, make them an offer, and then they go, what the hell? And I go, and then I say, what's stopping you? What's stopping you? Like, what's stopping you? Oh, this stopping me. Okay, I solved that for you. What else is stopping you? And then there's this pressure and this intensity and this focus that just pushes people together. And you can end up doing so much more with just a small group of people. Nucleus is a small group of people. We're like 12 people full time right now. We're cranking. 12 people full time. We've, at this point, we've raised, some of which was not announced yet, but so, you know what I'm saying? So there's this very deep kind of fact to me, which is you have to be able to look at the organization like a machine, and you have to be able to know when to move on. Even for people who've been at the company a while, you have to know. That's the hard thing.
So first of all, depending on when this is released, we'll talk and I'll bleep the number. I have lots of mutual to this founder therapy, but I have, they come in segments, and I'm curious first to like dissect where you think you've learned better ways or where you've made mistakes. But let me start, kind of with a posit. One of the reasons I think this is so challenging for founders, because we often hear this advice, even as we're starting the company, that's what people say,
Yes.
Hire slow, fire fast, even if you changed it to hire fast, fire fast. And yet every founder that I've had for this podcast or many other podcasts that we run, or that I've talked to behind the scenes, I've talked to lots of founders every single day, everybody continuously, even if they're second time or third time founders, whether they get better at it, they make this mistake and they feel it, and it's the thing they mention. And I tell this because our core service is aimed at tech talent. And I tell tech talent all the time, you don't realize how much founders do not feel like they figured this out, and it's hard for them too.
It is, yeah, it's very hard.
One of the reasons I think is because we have to be so optimistic about everything. And so we come up with ways to think about the talent that we've invested in or thought to invest in and bet on. And so we begin to justify and believe that we might fix it, or believe that there's something worth salvaging, or believe there's some powerful outcome that might come out of that person that might make up for all the negative.
Or that they've been in the company a long time. There's an inertia bias, right? It's not always that like, you hire someone, they're like, this person's not good. There could be a slow, gradual, drip by drip process where someone just no longer the right fit.
Exactly.
That can happen. And that's great. They can, you support that person, you help that person. That person's, probably a killer because you hired them and they go start their next thing. That's amazing. But they're not the right fit right now for the company.
Now, you
have to act decisively. You have to act decisively, and it's a skill. It's, one analogy I like to use is like, it's hard to break up with someone. Imagine you have to, basically it's part of your life to have to break up with someone, whatever, once a month, whatever it ends up being. Maybe that's too aggressive.
That's funny.
Oh my God, I have to break up again? Oh my God, this is so hard.
Like a breakup.
It's every single time, and it's never easy.
I know people will watch this and cringe at the both of us, me for agreeing with what you just said and you for saying it. I'll tell you, you are right. It is like a breakup because founders take that failure very personally. And that doesn't mean, by the way, the person might be more economically effective. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking from an emotional perspective. What you just pointed out is very true. Failures in hiring at a certain seniority, if you're an intern fails,
if someone's here short term,
yeah.
I'm talking about people who've been at the company.
It's extremely
and those are the hardest
similar.
ones. Those are the hardest ones.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that actually stick around. There's that old thing where it's like if someone's really a C player, they're gone.
Right.
If they're an A player, they're great. If they're the B player, kind of do work.
Let me first ask this question. What have you found to be now your flags that you've either said, okay, I'm going to act faster on these, or that you've added to the I need to be more oriented towards the values. I need to see the operations. I need to see, if you had to say, here's what I accepted in year 1 that I don't accept in year 5.
Well, there's a Slack channel on Nucleus. The Slack channel is called Ship and Sell. It's basically our general channel, where it's this theory that's like, look, you're either shipping or selling. If you are not shipping or selling, you have no purpose here at this company. And maybe that's obvious, or maybe not, actually.
That feels less emotionally attached to the idea of relentless execution and standards. It feels more like another interesting thing you're doing there, which is you're also making a role statement, a philosophy on for example, operations. It sounds like you weeded out operations.
I do want to be clear. You still must have compassion for people, especially in a startup. One thing is if you're, Zuckerberg at Meta, okay, you have, whatever, 1,000 employees. You agree with 10 people. You've broken bread together. You spilled blood together. There's a very real thing where you form deep relations with people, and those should be cherished and valued and compassionately given. So, even if I do think there's a world where you can be really hard and relentless, but still compassionate. And that's really important. I think that it's a dichotomy too much in tech where it's you're Elon and founder mode, or you're too weak. And it's well, I think you can be kind of relentless, but still kind of intentional, careful, thoughtful. Like, I feel like that's gotten kind of lost from the narrative, right? If you
Well,
like,
because it's
in the way that, like,
enemies and heroes.
yeah, maybe like in the way that if you look at like, and this is kind of such a trite example. I hate to use it. I wish I could have a more better example in my head in this moment. But the thing, like, if you watch like a kind of keynote, like Apple keynote, and then you watch like an Elon Musk, like a, whatever Tesla announcement, and you're like, wow, and like it's amazing how the fundamental modus operandi of the way the founders are, who they are, what they believe, manifest in their presentations. And that can tell you everything about Apple and everything about, Tesla. And both work. And that's the thing that gets missed so often too, which is people can have very different philosophies and then yet both could be a resounding success. And I think that's kind of amazing. Like if you think about, and my point here is like, if you just ask like someone blind who's more kind of intentional, Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, you probably say, well, Steve Jobs seems more intentional. And it's not even saying that's like inherently better. That means like Steve Jobs will change the world more than Elon or whatever. It's just saying that, yeah, you watch an Apple keynote, you're like, wow, they got like the timing of like the slide change down to like a perfection. You watch then the Tesla thing, you're like, what is going on? in a great way.
The window broke during the throwing of the...
What is like? You're like, this is like the craziest thing ever, which is great. But again, it's like we look to a lot of people in tech look to these people as heroes. You almost think of that as like a metaphor for the broader societal moment that we're in tech, where in the Jobsonian era, whatever, it was like, hey, be careful, be intentional, be thoughtful, be deliberate. And then now it's like, does that really matter? And I think there's this question of like founder mode. I think a lot of people misunderstand that. Like, what does that actually mean? Whatever. But I do think there's something that's like missed from that. I think one reason why it really spread, one is obviously PG said it, of course. But another reason is that like it captures the zeitgeist in a way perfectly. Yeah. Like it, in a way, articulates what everyone already wants to be true, which is Elon comes in with the sink literally, and fires all of Twitter, and it still works. And then that there's something to that that's like it's the anti-hero almost. The anti-hero is the hero now.
But to your point about there could be a way to like more there's a middle ground between that compassion and that ruthlessness. Even that story is also, I think, indicative of that, as in the nuance of the Twitter conversation, because I find that really interesting. I have and I've said this publicly before, I have like mixed feelings on Elon as a technologist and now a political actor. But one of the things that you have to understand about, let's say, the Twitter example is that if it doesn't challenge your belief, if you don't like him and it doesn't challenge your beliefs about him, then you lack intellectual rigor. And one of the things that's true about it is it doesn't say that every company needs to reduce its staff by 80%, but it does suggest that from a technological perspective.
There's bloat.
What's that?
There's bloat.
Yeah, there's bloat. There's not only bloat, but it could have run that bloat. Or maybe the bloat was mostly excess and some part of like trust and safety should have been kept. But like the notion essentially of that could go to some other level doesn't mean Facebook needs to operate the same way. Facebook has a different theory, serves an audience very differently.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Google serves an audience very differently.
And then also the counter to that as well. If you look at like Zuck's brand evolution, you see someone who is more laissez-faire, maybe, someone who's more just like, again, I hate to use this term because like what does it mean? But founder mode, right? There's something about it that feels like tech is sort of like,
I do think bloat is and still is, kind of infested throughout the industry. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's a good thing, and that's why that entire process of trying to scale back, cut down, and make the business more efficient is great. And of course, AI does that too. And to your point too, you said we don't really hear people talking about this. It's a hard conversation to have. It's a really hard conversation to have. I mean, I think the world is going to be dramatically different over the coming years, decade, and often a lot of the talk is too generalizable to be useful. Like if you listen to some of the AI companies talk about AI, it always feels very just abstract enough, and I always say that kind of thinking the intellectual plane, right? This is the physical plane. There's the intellectual plane. Whatever you kind of think and imagine, can come real, right? There's a kind of a connection between these two things, and like I think that it's important to start articulating today what can happen because people's thinking have very material consequences, It's like when people talk.
I do think we're somewhat at an actual wall though with that. And I didn't believe that until there was a researcher who left OpenAI. I didn't know of him until this, but Miles Brundage left OpenAI and it was significant. So that's when I was like, I'll read his Substack about leaving. And like 5-7 paragraphs in, he has this section where he says, I think one of the lines starts in the paragraph something like, the frontier labs are not ready for AGI, neither is the world. This next sentence says something like, I don't think the leadership at OpenAI would disagree with this. And if you read the whole thing, the way I walked away from it is they're not necessarily sure how this looks at this point. You can see the obvious stuff of AI inserted, for example, as co-pilots.
And I can tell you as someone who's built at the frontier of technology, scientists, technologists, you fundamentally do not know or can't fully predict ever how the technology will manifest.
Yes.
I think everyone thinks that understanding technology is upstream of understanding its ultimate implications and changes to society. But it's not.
But society doesn't want probabilistic thinking and uncertainty. They want deterministic, here's what's going to happen next. I'm not sure you could communicate the first thing.
I would say a little bit differently, which is like, if you ask Ilya to explain LLMs, he can do it better than anyone in the world. It's amazing. Yeah. But in a weird way, and this might sound crazy to say, so bear with me here, but in a weird way, if I took my sister and gave her OpenAI and said, hey, play with this, and figure out how to incorporate into your life, in a weird way, she'll understand it more than Ilya will. Because she understands the ultimate manifestation of it. She abstracts away everything else. It doesn't matter to her. And I say this, again, very experientially. I understand the way Nucleus' technology works so intimately. It is the dearest thing to my soul. And yet, I give someone a score. They look at the score. They go, okay, what now? Which is great. That's great. That should be their framework, and Nucleus will build software that helps support that. But what I'm trying to say to you is, fundamentally, the understanding of the technology is a different question. It's a different endeavor. It's a different investigative process. It's a different framework than the introduction of technology to society. One of the and it's so hard to articulate this. I hope this is a good articulation, but I think AI is a really great example of this, because the vast majority of people who use, LLMs, they have no idea how it works. Of course not. They have no idea. But in a weird way, they understand it at a deeper level than all these scientists at OpenAI. And I don't know if that makes sense.
And ChatGPT was released under an OpenAI that did not believe it was going to be a big deal. So that's almost proof of what you just said.
100%. I mean, even if you look at, again, I hate to use this analogy because it's also kind of overly used at this point, but if you watch, Oppenheimer, right? They have these physicists that are, doing all these beautiful calculations and math. It's art, it's theory, it's all these things. There's a scene in the movie where they take the, atomic bomb. It's in Los Alamos, and the government comes in, and they're like, they're kind of proud. They're like sitting there, whatever. Oppenheimer's sitting there. He's like, oh, look at this, and then they just take it away. And then there's this moment where it goes from technology in the lab and theory and beauty and physics and math and scientists, experimentation to society. And then it's obviously dropped bomb. And, Oppenheimer then has the famous quote where he says, I didn't drop the bomb, Truman did, or whoever. And I think about that a lot because it's so fascinating to me, this idea that, and as someone who, in my own very mini way, obviously not what we're doing, it's not like the atomic bomb, but in my own way, I came to an intellectual frontier. I came to the frontier of technology. I productized it. I brought it to the market in a way, end to end, literally. And then I realized very directly, oh my God, like investigation, science is fundamentally different than enterprise. There was definitely an obsession with me in my earliest days of Nucleus where I wanted to understand everything. It's so naive to think about, it's kind of funny, but I wanted to understand everything about statistics, everything about genetics. And it was like a fucking obsession. But over time, the kind of infinite
knowing did not give you a reward. There was diminishing return.
Well, it's never ending. I mean, it's this
There's
thing,
too
then that
much,
thing, then that thing,
and
then that thing,
then-
then that thing, and then it's like a recursive function that just keeps going, and eventually it's like, oh, do I want to do this mathematical proof to prove that this thing is true, or
But then some other priority.
or can I trust my instincts enough?
Some priority in life or work is what makes is what helps you then also, by the way, wean off of it. Because if you did not have another priority in life or work, you might actually go down that infinite well.
Well, and you'd go a little bit crazy.
But abstracting away from that.
Yeah, I mean, but the productization of the intellectual alpha, that productization process then puts you on a separately different path completely.
Yes.
And that's something that I think I experienced over time too. So.
Course 2, what a doozy.
What a doozy.
Shall we move to course 3?
Yeah, let's do it.
Good job, Kian.
Oh,
Thank you
Oh, I
so
love
much.
this. So good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Kian, we are in course number 3.
We did it.
We did it. 3 courses. How you feeling?
Feeling great.
We got some delicious mochi ice cream here at Mr. O in Flatiron. Highly recommend. In course 3, I've emailed a bunch of your founder friends. So we asked your founder friends who know you well questions that they think I should ask you. And, with the lens of what they think founders might be able to learn from your experience, we've obviously had a great conversation. They'll learn from a lot. But the first one that you and I have even talked about, and I know you've probably also talked about, I think, when you've told your story elsewhere, is the founding moment for you. And I'll say, I think, the reason I think this is interesting and important for founders to hear is so that if they're going through it, they understand to embrace it, to be okay with it. But I've classified like what I feel they should feel before you've told the story. Tell us the story of the intensity of starting Nucleus and what that was like for you.
Yeah. How'd this feel? Brain food, I'm sorry. So yeah. Well, I think, the thing to remember is I leave school. It's COVID. I actually tell my parents that, frankly, I lied to them. I told them I was working on something else. I told them I was working with a professor at Penn. Not true. Which already, put quite a bit of pressure on me. And I think it's important to remember that, like, when you are starting on such an enterprise in your bedroom, I filled in literally 18 subject notebooks. On the very first page, it says, I'm going to build Nucleus. Nucleus is like a consumer genetic analysis platform that is going to do these things. And that's literally how Nucleus started. And then the question is, well, how do I do that, right? And what began was almost like a spiritual endeavor. In the way that a monk, wakes up and, maybe eats, walks around, and then meditates, then does it the next day, and 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 the next day. It was kind of had that simplicity and intensity. And if you think about Nucleus, for me, I'd wake up, I'd meditate for an hour, I would work, and I would work, and I would work, and I would work. And then I'd meditate for another hour, and I'd sleep. And what I think gets often missed is that here's one person in their bedroom, no capital, no mentors, no co-founders, no familial support. If anything, it's all kind of, what the hell are you doing in your bedroom? And
Questions.
Also, again, I told them I was doing something else actually. So like it's like even more stress on top of that. Out of school. And when I say out of school, I don't mean, I got the Teal Fellowship and now, no. I don't mean even I got any fellowship. There was no money. There was nothing. There was nothing. You have your own thoughts, your own mind. It is
Your own skepticism.
Your own skepticism, your doubt. You don't know if this works. I don't even know at that point. I wasn't some computation genomics expert. Far from it. It was a project. I have no idea this is going to work. I basically, from my point of view, I don't know how to articulate how someone gives everything they can possibly give into an endeavor. I think that's also gets lost. I think there's a lot of founders who are kind of tourists. They come, this is cool, and then there are founders, and they're rare. They're really rare. But you meet them, you're like, oh my god, like this person's gonna die on the court to like do this, and that's what Silicon Valley is about, and those founders, should be revered, I think, in a respect. So that's sort of my kind of thinking on the whole experience.
Do you think it could have been built any other way?
No. I mean, I think that to start a genetics company in your bedroom, there has to be a extremity of personality, especially as a college dropout. I mean, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I think you could probably start it if you're a PhD or something. But here's the ironic thing, which is having a PhD or the like, one would think it helps because you actually know more about the subject, or one would think it helps because you're some sort of expert. But if anything, you're kind of more institutionalized with your knowledge, and it's actually holds you back more than propels you forward. And that's actually an interesting dynamic that people forget all the time. One has to wonder, in Silicon Valley, 23andMe was started in 2006. It's been 20 years. 20 years There hasn't been another genetics company. I mean, what the hell is going on? There's been 100 B2B companies. There's been like 10 ride-sharing companies. They've all raised like billions of dollars, right? There's been, the AI companies today, like how many B2B software tools are there? There's like 500. Like, YC's invested in, 490 of them.
How much money in Web3? That's my
Yeah, like Web3, crypto, it's like 700. It's like, where are the genetics companies? I mean, if I asked you to name another genetics company besides 23andMe, actually, maybe I'd be biased now because we had an interview earlier. But could you name another Silicon Valley genetics company? Could you do it?
I think I can.
You don't think you can? I mean, that's what's crazy to me. So there's something about this that's fundamentally weird and broken, and also like something that's almost inherently anti-establishment almost. Like,
when you're on that brink, I'm curious. I'll say like what I think is true about it. Usually, what's going on is a lot of other options are going through your head, priorities that you could take instead, priorities about your health, about your life, about career. Is this going to work? Is a big one. Like, am I betting on something that is going to matter? What was the thing that you think, and for you it sounds like it was a year of hours. What was the thing that was pushing you to feel like you're at that edge amongst all of that?
So, I read this recently. I think it was yesterday. Terence Tao, the mathematician?
Mm-hmm.
There's supposedly someone said, maybe he wrote this, who knows, that when he would think about math problems, he would close his eyes and shrivel up into a baby position and then start dramatically rolling around. That's the closest thing I can think of to what's it like to be that deep.
Was it because you were feeling so much? Because it's a very intellectual exercise, right? The thing you were doing was structured in a way, right? You're doing like market and product and science discovery.
At this point, it's science. It's basic science.
Yeah.
At this point, it's basic science. It's not even necessarily like there is a product conceptualization, but it's fundamentally science. It's fundamentally.
And you're having like a visceral body reaction.
Yeah, it's a bodily thing. I mean, yeah. It's, I would close my eyes and think for hours. I really hope one day someone goes and looks at the notebooks because it is so deep and is so obsessive that it's a little crazy. I mean, I think that was the first time that I read ever a story of something that I felt like I've experienced.
You're going to love my next question on that basis. If you were going to start something else tomorrow, if I forced you to start, if I gave you capital and I said, you're starting another startup, what is the thing you're starting?
Well, I could do a much better job if I started a second startup. I have a tendency that in my life, it oscillates between extremes. And if I was on the extremely investigative side of things for the first bit of Nucleus, now I'm on the extremely enterprising thing. At either end, I missed the other. So when I was in the bedroom, rolling on the floor with my eyes closed, it was, you miss out on sort of talking to people and, just life really. Like there's no concept of news or outside of your own, mental world. It's weird. It's kind of weird. So you kind of yearn for the other thing. And then similarly now I kind of yearn for the investigation. I yearn for the thing. So if you ask me what I would do, I would go back to the lab. And what I mean by that specifically is I would probably try to build an artificial womb.
Oh.
Yeah. That's what I would do.
For the science of it or for some curiosity? Like for the
science and then
outcome?
eventually the commercialization of it to society. I think it's surprising that doesn't exist yet.
Fascinating. Oh, I have so many questions, but I know we're limited on time. We'll come back to that one day. It also sounds like some very small part of you might want to build an enterprise SaaS company.
What?
The part that yearns for conversation, the part that yearns for operation when they're rolling.
No, what the
What job would you do if I said you can't be a founder?
I would love to work for a beast founder. I would love that. That'd be amazing.
Ooh, just like as a chief of staff or all hands.
Yeah, because nothing would make me happier than seeing a maniac do their work. I would love that. I thought about that all the time. I was like, oh, it'd be so good. Also, not all the pressure is on you ultimately. Right now, you make all the decisions. It's nice to be like, this is what I think, this is what I recommend, this is my understanding, but it's your call. And it rides and dies on someone else's shoulders. It'll just take off pressure. Not that I mind that pressure, but I mean, just a different kind of way of living or different modus operandi, right? People go home at night. I never go home at night. in a metaphorical way.
Right. In the office, there is a mattress.
Not in a literal way. I have slept in the office, but not the best experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it accidentally.
It's not the worst.
Yeah.
You need to go home.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
So
100%.
that's what I think. I would love that. I would chief of staff or some other position. I would love to help. I would love to like help a founder that's like up and coming. Like, hey, like you should consider this, consider that. You never tell them what to do. It's always like you provide them frameworks or ideas for what to do.
Last question. You could go back in time and give the version of yourself post the bedroom, so post conception and you're starting the company, all this other stuff, one piece of advice that isn't about hiring or isn't about the things we've already talked about hiring. What's something that you would want to whisper to yourself?
Keep going.
Keep going. Just, yeah, keep going. 3 course founders, well done. That's course 3. Again, shout out to Mr. O. They've been
Great job.
fantastic, delicious here in Flatiron, 24th Street.
Amazing. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thanks for all the insights.
All right, cool.
Well
Thanks,
done.
brother.